It was a busy afternoon on a crowded street. People were walking by, chatting on their phones, hailing cabs, or rushing to their destinations. Amidst the hustle, a young thug, dressed in baggy clothes and a flashy chain, noticed a man walking alone. He didn't recognize him at first. Jeans, a simple jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, completely unassuming. But something about the man's calm presence irked the thug. "Look at this old dude, thinks he owns the street," the thug muttered to his friends, a smirk playing on his lips. They laughed, thinking it would be fun to intimidate him. Confidence was everything to them, and showing weakness was never an option. The thug stepped forward, blocking the man's path. "Hey, old man, what are you doing here? You look like a joke," he sneered, shoving his shoulder lightly as if to assert dominance. His friends laughed, filming with their phones, expecting the man to cower or react with fear. But the man didn't flinch. He stopped, adjusted his cap, and looked at the thug with a steady, calm gaze. The street seemed to grow quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. There was no fear, no anger, only a quiet intensity that made everyone watching stop in their tracks. "Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see," the man said softly, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. The thug froze for a second, confused by the lack of reaction. He expected yelling, cursing, or at least some sign of intimidation. But instead, he was met with a presence that radiated control, confidence, and years of mastery. The crowd around them grew larger, curious about the unexpected confrontation. Passers-by pulled out their phones, recording every second. Some whispered, trying to guess who this man could be. The thug, now feeling the eyes of the crowd on him, tried to regain control. "Or what? You gonna—" He laughed nervously, but his bravado was slipping. The man didn't answer. He simply stood still, a faint smile on his face, calm as a still lake. And in that moment, everyone watching could sense something legendary about him. He wasn't just a man walking down the street. He was someone who had spent decades mastering discipline, patience, and martial arts, someone the world had learned to respect, whether they knew it or not. Speech balloon audience question. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance? Comment below. We all have at some point. The afternoon sun beat down on the crowded street, bouncing off car windows and creating a harsh glare on the pavement. The city moved in a constant rhythm, the honking of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren, a symphony of urban life. Among the crowd, Steven Seagal walked calmly, almost blending into the background. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a worn jacket made him look like any other passerby, but those who had learned to read the energy of people could immediately sense the quiet authority he carried. The thug, still reeling from the faint intimidation he had felt seconds ago, circled around him, trying to reassert control. "Who do you think you are?" he sneered, voice louder this time. "You can't just walk around like you own the street." His friends laughed, nudging each other, cameras raised to capture what they assumed would be an easy victory, a scene where an old man was humiliated for everyone's entertainment. Steven didn't flinch, didn't even lift his eyes at their cameras. He continued walking at the same steady pace, exuding calm. Every step he took seemed deliberate, measured, a silent display of someone entirely in control of himself and his surroundings. People began to notice the unusual scene. Pedestrians slowed, curious about the strange tension in the air. There was no shouting match, no dramatic gestures, just a man walking and another trying desperately to provoke him. The thug tried again, this time stepping closer. "Hey, you think you're some kind of martial artist or something?" he mocked. "Please. I could take you down in seconds." He raised his fists, more for show than real intent. His friends laughed, egging him on. They were confident that the man in front of them was nothing more than an easy target. But the crowd's whispers grew. Some had recognized the faint familiarity in his face, the air of someone who had been in countless movies or seen in martial arts circles. Others had no idea who he was but sensed something unusual, an aura that made even the loudest bully hesitate. Steven stopped and turned to face him fully for the first time. No anger, no impatience, just a calm stare that seemed to pierce through the thug's bravado. "Strength," he said quietly, "is not measured by how loudly you shout or how many people follow you. It is measured by the control you have over yourself and the respect you give to others." The thug scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, sure, old man. Whatever you say." He pushed lightly against Steven's shoulder again, thinking he was testing the limits. But something was different this time. The push didn't have the expected effect. Steven's stance was unshakable. His calm energy acted like an invisible wall, subtly forcing the thug to reconsider his actions. Pedestrians had begun stopping in their tracks, some pulling out phones to record. Even strangers waiting for buses or walking dogs turned to watch. Everyone could feel that something important was about to happen. A lesson in humility was being quietly written on the street. The thug's friends started to get nervous. "Maybe we should just back off," one whispered, sensing the shift in energy. But the leader of the group wasn't ready to give up. He wanted to prove himself in front of the crowd. "No, I've got this. Watch me embarrass this guy." Steven didn't speak again. He just remained calm, as though waiting for the thug to realize his own mistake. There was a lesson here that no amount of arrogance could teach. Patience and control are often the most powerful weapons. In that moment, the street became a stage, the audience unaware they were watching more than just a confrontation. They were witnessing the quiet presence of a man who had spent decades mastering the art of self-discipline, someone whose reputation as a martial arts legend was not built on display, but on mastery and respect. Speech balloon engagement prompt. Drop a folded hands in the comments if you believe calmness and patience are stronger than anger and arrogance. The stage was set. The thug, blinded by ego, had no idea the lesson about to unfold would be unforgettable. Steven Seagal's quiet approach had already spoken louder than any words. And now, the moment everyone had been waiting for, the conflict, was about to begin. The thug's arrogance had reached its peak. His friends were whispering nervously behind him, but he refused to back down. "I've had enough of this old man staring at me like he owns the place," he muttered, stepping closer to Steven Seagal. "Time for you to learn your place." He shoved Steven's shoulder harder this time, expecting some reaction, perhaps fear, perhaps a flinch, or maybe even a shouted threat. Instead, Steven remained completely still. The shove had no effect, as if it hit an invisible wall. The calm in his eyes was unsettling. His gaze wasn't filled with anger or hatred, only a steady awareness that made the thug suddenly feel exposed, small, and foolish. "Or what?" The thug laughed nervously, raising his fists this time. "You gonna fight me? Come on. Let's see what you've got." His bravado was faltering, but he wasn't ready to admit it yet. He was sure that anyone his size could overpower an older man. The crowd watching had begun to murmur. Some were whispering guesses, trying to figure out why the man wasn't reacting. Others simply stared, their curiosity growing into awe. Steven took a slow step forward, just one, and the air seemed to shift. The calm energy around him was palpable. "Violence," he said softly, his voice carrying over the street, "is not always about strength. But ignorance," he added, looking the thug directly in the eye, "can be costly." The thug laughed, but this time it was forced. He swung his arm, trying to punch Steven. But in an instant, Steven's reflexes, honed over decades of martial arts mastery, kicked in. With fluid precision, he sidestepped the punch, grabbed the thug's arm, and used his momentum to gently but firmly bring him off balance. The thug stumbled, his own strength working against him. The crowd gasped. Phones were raised, cameras recording every second. The thug's friends tried to intervene, but Steven's calm dominance was almost magnetic. No words were exchanged. His body alone was teaching the lesson. The thug tried again, this time more aggressively. "You're lucky," he shouted, trying to push back, to regain some sense of control. But Steven moved with calculated precision, disarming his attacks without breaking a sweat. Every movement was smooth, controlled, and deliberate, a living demonstration of years of practice. It wasn't brutality, it was restraint. It was skill showing its power without the need to hurt unnecessarily. As the thug realized he was no match, his bravado crumbled. He fell to his knees, not from pain, but from the sudden understanding of how completely outmatched he was. The onlookers whispered excitedly. Some recognized the calm authority in Steven, some were simply in awe of the unexpected spectacle. Steven stepped back, letting the thug regain his footing, but maintaining the silence that carried authority. "You don't learn from arrogance," he said, his voice low but clear, "only from respect." Speech balloon audience engagement question. If you were watching this unfold, what would you do? Step in to help, or stand back and watch the lesson happen? Comment below. We want to know how you would react. The thug's friends helped him up, their faces pale and shaken. No one laughed anymore. The initial excitement of a street spectacle had turned into a lesson about humility and restraint. Pedestrians who had come out of curiosity now whispered among themselves about the mysterious man in front of them. For the thug, this was more than embarrassment. He had learned firsthand that raw aggression without understanding is dangerous. The crowd had seen how control, patience, and skill could silence arrogance without shouting, without rage, without humiliation. Steven, meanwhile, remained calm, unaffected by the chaos. He had demonstrated power not for pride, but as a reminder, respect and mastery outweigh arrogance and impulsiveness. The street, once filled with noise and tension, now seemed quieter, as if absorbing the lesson that had just been delivered. And in that moment, everyone realized, this was not just a confrontation. It was a teaching, a demonstration of real strength, the kind that comes from discipline, practice, and humility. The thug, now humbled and silent, finally understood that some lessons can't be taught by words alone. Some lessons demand to be experienced, and this was one he would never forget. The street was silent, but the tension was palpable. Pedestrians who had been passing by slowed to a standstill, their curiosity turning into awe. Phones were raised everywhere, recording, live-streaming, capturing every subtle movement of the legendary martial artist who had just humiliated a thug without even breaking a sweat. The thug, still trembling, staggered backward. His friends hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene or flee. The air around them felt heavy, charged with the quiet authority Steven Seagal radiated. He had not yelled, threatened, or overpowered them violently. Yet, in those moments, the thug had learned a lesson more powerful than any street fight. People in the crowd whispered among themselves. "Is that him?" one woman asked, pointing subtly. A young man holding his phone froze. No way. Could that be Steven Seagal? Meanwhile, the thug's friends tried to act like everything was fine. "Come on, man. Let's go," one whispered, tugging at his sleeve. But the thug, humiliated and pale, could barely move. He realized that the entire crowd had witnessed his arrogance crumble. There was no excuse now. Everyone had seen what had happened. An old man leaning against a lamppost shook his head. "I've seen a lot in my life," he muttered to no one in particular. "But that was something else." Even the street vendors paused what they were doing, captivated by the unusual scene unfolding in front of them. Steven Seagal remained calm, standing still, his gaze scanning the crowd for a brief moment. It was not pride that shone in his eyes, but quiet understanding, an awareness that true strength is measured by composure, not chaos. Some onlookers whispered about the thug. "He deserved that," one said. "He thought he could just push anyone around." Others shook their heads. "No, this is more than that," a woman said. "It's a lesson for all of us. Strength isn't just physical, it's the restraint to act only when necessary." And then, something remarkable happened. A few pedestrians approached Steven cautiously, unsure how to speak to the man who had just demonstrated such power. One young woman finally asked, "Are you really Steven Seagal?" He nodded briefly, a faint smile on his face. No words of arrogance, no self-promotion, just acknowledgement. The thug, now fully aware of the mistake he had made, muttered under his breath, I didn't know." His voice carried a mix of fear and regret. His friends, equally shaken, hung their heads in silence. The street, once filled with the sounds of traffic and casual chatter, now resonated with a different energy, the kind that only comes when a lesson has been delivered so publicly and effectively that no one present could forget it. Some people in the crowd began asking each other questions. What would you have done if you were there? Could you stay calm like that? These questions were not just rhetorical, they were reflective. The entire incident had made everyone present consider their own behavior, their own approach to arrogance, and how they treated others. Speech balloon audience engagement question. If you were there on that street, witnessing this unfold, what would you have done? Step in to help, walk away, or just watch the lesson happen? Comment below. We want to see how you would react. Meanwhile, the thug's bravado had completely evaporated. He no longer tried to justify himself, no longer acted tough. The realization had sunk in. He had been humiliated not by strength alone, but by the quiet, controlled power of someone who had mastered himself. The people who had gathered slowly began to disperse, but the whispers didn't die down. Phones were still recording, stories were being shared, and the aura of respect surrounding Steven Seagal lingered like a tangible presence on the street. Even the vendors returned to their work, but with new energy, a sense that something extraordinary had just happened. As Steven began to walk away, calm and unhurried, a few brave spectators called out to him, asking for selfies or just a word. He nodded politely, smiling faintly, acknowledging them without arrogance. The thug, left behind in shame, understood that he had crossed paths with a man who was not only a martial arts legend, but also a living example of humility, discipline, and quiet authority. By the time Steven disappeared around the corner, the street had returned to its normal rhythm, yet everyone present knew the energy had changed. They had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in respect, control, and the unspoken power of self-mastery. And the story of what had just happened would be retold for years, carried in whispered conversations, phone videos, and social media posts. Just when the tension on the street seemed to dissipate, the sound of a sleek black car pulling up made heads turn. The crowd, still buzzing from what they had witnessed moments ago, instinctively stepped aside. 3 men in suits emerged from the vehicle, carrying folders, clipboards, and a sense of urgency. Their eyes scanned the street until they found the man at the center of the commotion, Steven Seagal. "Mr. Seagal, we've been trying to reach you all morning," one of the executives called out, hurrying toward him. The calm authority in his presence didn't waver, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Whispers of recognition spread like wildfire. A few brave onlookers began to speak up. "Wait, is that the Steven Seagal?" one woman asked, pointing at him. "The martial arts legend? The actor?" The thug, still struggling to process everything, froze in place. His friends slowly inched backward, their confidence shattered. This was no ordinary man they had mocked. The realization hit the thug like a tidal wave. He had humiliated a legend in front of dozens of witnesses. Steven turned to face the executives, nodding politely. "Good morning. Let's go over the documents," he said, calm and composed as always. The crowd's murmurs escalated into audible gasps. "He's not just a martial artist," one man whispered to his friend. "He's important. Really important." The executives quickly explained the reason for their visit. "Sir, this is regarding the acquisition. We've finalized the paperwork. Congratulations. You are now the majority owner of this property, including the streets and businesses in this area." The crowd's astonishment turned into a mixture of awe and disbelief. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and people whispered feverishly. The thug's jaw dropped, and his bravado completely evaporated. He had just realized that the man he had mocked was not only a martial arts master, but also a powerful business owner, someone whose influence extended far beyond the street confrontation they had just witnessed. Steven looked at the thug with calm, steady eyes. "I came here to walk, not to teach a lesson. But arrogance has a way of showing its consequences," he said softly, the words carrying the weight of both his presence and experience. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. If you were the thug in this situation, what would you do? Apologize immediately, or just walk away silently? Comment below with "apologize" or "walk away." We want to see what you would do. The thug lowered his gaze, ashamed. I didn't know," he stammered, voice barely audible. He understood now that his ignorance and ego had led to a public humiliation, but more importantly, he had encountered someone who commanded respect not through fear, but through presence and mastery. Steven's calm demeanor never wavered. "It's not about power over others," he continued. "It's about self-mastery, control, and humility. One day, the choices you make will reflect who you really are." The thug nodded, realizing the truth in the words. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions, and the realization was humbling. The crowd, still lingering, began to approach Steven cautiously, some asking for selfies, some just wanting to speak to him. He acknowledged each politely, always composed, always calm. It was clear that fame or power didn't define him, respect did. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. Drop a folded hands in the comments if you think humility and respect are more powerful than ego and arrogance. The executives led Steven toward the black car, the paperwork safely in hand, as the crowd watched silently. The thug and his friends remained behind, pale and speechless. They had been taught a lesson without a single punch being thrown, a lesson in respect, humility, and the consequences of arrogance. As the car drove away, the crowd erupted into whispers and murmurs. "I can't believe what I just saw," one woman said. "That was incredible." Another man added, "He's not just a martial artist, he's a legend in every sense of the word." For the thug, the revelation was life-changing. He had mocked a man he assumed was powerless, only to discover that the very person he had underestimated held immense influence and mastery. The experience was humbling, unforgettable, and transformative. And for everyone who witnessed it, the lesson was clear. Strength is not measured by intimidation or loudness. True power comes from control, mastery, and respect, and the consequences of underestimating someone can be both public and profound. Speech balloon final audience question. Have you ever underestimated someone and been surprised by their true strength? Share your story in the comments. Let's see who's experienced a lesson like this firsthand. The black car disappeared down the street, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a humbled thug. For a moment, the street seemed almost too quiet, as if the world itself had paused to absorb what had just occurred. Pedestrians whispered among themselves, replaying the moment in their heads. Some replayed it on their phones, while others simply stood, staring at the spot where Steven Seagal had last been. The thug, still pale and shaking, sank to a nearby bench. His friends hovered nervously around him, their confidence long gone. He couldn't stop thinking about the quiet authority of the man he had tried to humiliate. No shouting, no threats, no overt displays of power, just calm, mastery, and presence. He had underestimated someone entirely, and the lesson had been both public and undeniable. One of the crowd members, a middle-aged man who had witnessed everything firsthand, approached the thug cautiously. "You learned something today, didn't you?" he asked softly. The thug nodded, speechless, realizing that every word, every movement from Steven had spoken louder than any threat could. Meanwhile, the street slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Cars honked in the distance, people resumed their conversations, and the vendors returned to their stalls. Yet, the energy of the crowd had changed. There was a new sense of respect, a quiet understanding that power is not always loud, and humility is often the greatest strength. Steven Seagal, in the meantime, had walked a few blocks away to a quieter side street. He moved with the same calm and unhurried pace as before, not looking back, not needing recognition. To him, the encounter was simple, a moment to remind someone that arrogance has consequences, and that respect is earned through actions, not intimidation. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. If you were walking down the street and witnessed this, would you approach to speak with him, or simply watch and learn from the lesson? Comment below. We want to know your reaction. Back on the main street, the thug slowly rose to his feet. He had spent the past few minutes reflecting on his actions, realizing how foolish he had been. His friends, who had once mocked the quiet man in jeans, now looked at him with a mixture of shame and awe. One of them muttered, "I can't believe we just tried to challenge him. We didn't even know who we were dealing with." The thug turned to the crowd, now more aware of their eyes, and quietly muttered an apology to no one in particular, a small gesture, but one born from genuine realization. He understood that respect cannot be demanded through fear or aggression. It must be earned through humility and understanding. The crowd, sensing the change in energy, began to disperse slowly. Some left with their phones recording, eager to share the story online. Others left quietly, impressed by what they had witnessed firsthand. The lesson of the encounter lingered, not just in the thug's mind, but in the minds of everyone who had paused to watch. Steven Seagal's presence had left a lasting impression, not through violence, but through the demonstration of self-control, patience, and mastery. The thug's ego had been dismantled without cruelty, replaced by a newfound respect for those who carry themselves with calm authority. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. Who do you know in your life that carries themselves with quiet strength and humility? Tag them in the comments or share your story. Let's celebrate real strength together. As the crowd finally thinned, the street returned to normal, but the memory of the encounter remained vivid. People replayed it in their minds, discussing how a single calm individual had completely shifted the energy of an entire block. The thug, still shaken but now thoughtful, made a silent vow to approach life differently, to think before acting, to respect before judging, and to recognize that appearances can be deceiving. For Steven Seagal, the lesson was simple. Sometimes the most powerful way to influence others is not through confrontation, but through quiet action, presence, and integrity. The thug had learned, the crowd had learned, and the city had witnessed firsthand that real strength is often silent, but unmistakably impactful. By the time Steven disappeared into the city streets, the lesson had been delivered. The thug would never forget it, and neither would the crowd. Respect had been taught, humility had been observed, and the story of the martial arts legend who humiliated a thug without ever raising his voice would live on, retold, replayed, and remembered. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. Type legend in the comments if you believe true strength comes from calm, humility, and respect. Share where you're watching from. Let's celebrate those who embody quiet power. As the street slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the events of the past hour lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed them. The thug, once full of arrogance and bravado, now walked away humbled, his thoughts consumed with reflection. His friends followed quietly, aware that a lesson far greater than any physical fight had been delivered. And for the crowd that had gathered, the story they had just experienced would not be forgotten. Steven Seagal had not sought fame in that moment. He did not shout, nor did he strike with anger. Instead, he displayed a mastery that few could understand at first glance: calmness, patience, and control. Every movement, every measured step, every glance carried the weight of decades of experience and discipline. This was power without ego, authority without intimidation, and respect without demand. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. If you've ever faced someone arrogant or disrespectful, how did you handle it? Comment below. Share your story and inspire others. The thug had learned a simple but profound truth. Strength is not in showing off, nor in forcing others to bow. True strength lies in self-control, humility, and the ability to influence others through presence rather than intimidation. For him, this lesson had been delivered publicly, painfully, and memorably. For the crowd, it was an opportunity to reflect on their own interactions. How often they judge by appearances, act impulsively, or underestimate others. And for those watching at home, this is the takeaway: respect is earned, not assumed. Humility is a far greater strength than pride. Arrogance may seem powerful in the short term, but discipline and integrity will always leave a lasting impact. Steven's quiet departure had left the street changed, the energy altered in a way that would be remembered for a long time. The encounter had not only humbled a would-be bully but had also taught the surrounding crowd, and, through stories and recordings, countless others, that life's most valuable lessons are often learned in unexpected ways. Glowing star moral of the story. True power is silent. It does not need to be announced. Respect everyone, regardless of how they look or act. Humility and self-control are stronger than aggression and ego. Arrogance often blinds us to the reality around us, while calm awareness opens doors we never imagined. Speech balloon audience engagement prompt. If you believe humility is real strength, type respect in the comments. Let's see how many of you live by this principle. Now, to all the viewers watching this story, if you enjoyed this incredible encounter, make sure to like this video to show your support. Every like helps us continue sharing real-life lessons and inspiring stories. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Join our community to witness more epic stories of courage, respect, and unforgettable moments from legends like Steven Seagal. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, because each story we share is packed with lessons, thrills, and moments that make you think twice about how you treat others. Speech balloon audience call to action. Share this story with a friend who needs a reminder about respect and humility. And comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing from fans around the world. Steven's encounter on that street was not just a moment of action or drama, it was a demonstration of timeless wisdom. The thug walked away changed. The crowd walked away inspired. And the lesson for everyone else is clear. The true measure of a person isn't in how loudly they assert themselves, but in how quietly they command respect and act with integrity. So remember, strength is measured not by what you can take from others, but by what you give: respect, calm, and wisdom. If you agree, like, comment, and subscribe now, and join us as we continue sharing stories that inspire, teach, and leave a mark on the heart and mind. This is the power of presence, the art of humility, and the legacy of true mastery, a lesson we can all carry into our own lives.